It's been a few weeks now since spring practice concluded for South Carolina's football team, and I gotta be honest, I still got a couple of questions about this team heading into next season.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, your show for the latest headlines and potential storylines on South Carolina Gamecock athletics. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecocks Digest over on SI.com. Thank you for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen or watch here today. We are free and available on YouTube and also wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. The South Carolina Gamecocks are currently in a bit of a quiet period. Not all of the players are currently here on campus right now, as finals have concluded, graduation ceremonies have taken place for the class of 2023, and a lot of guys are either back home or they're out training in a different state right now before they'll all regroup for summer workouts later on in June. And so I wanted to take today's show to look back at spring practice and mainly the questions I have coming out of the spring, because I've still got a few concerns, admittedly, about South Carolina's football team. And for me, pass protection on the edges of the offensive line is by far the biggest question mark coming out of spring ball. Obviously, this offseason, the Gamecocks saw a mass exodus in terms of overall experience that this group had this past fall, as Eric Douglas, Javon Gwynn, and Dylan Wonnum all walked out the door and took 124 career starts with them. But that was not the only loss that took place in the past few months. The Gamecocks suffered a massive blow at left tackle in the Garnet and Black spring game, as Jaylen Nichols suffered a left knee injury that, based on his social media posts recently, seemed to require some sort of procedure being done. Shane Beamer has since commented on what the potential timeline might be for Jaylen Nichols, and he was pretty vague, but he said that he's not going to be able to play at the beginning of the season and is hopeful he'll be there by season's end in 2023. Jaylen Nichols brings a lot of experience himself to the team. He has appeared in 38 games and started 18, which includes 8 starts at left tackle. So that is a big loss for South Carolina, considering how much they were going to expect to have Jaylen Nichols as being a potential veteran leader of this group heading into the fall. And the other thing is, when watching the spring game for South Carolina, it didn't offer a lot of promise in terms of the offensive line's performance. Now, I understand, again, the rosters were mixed up through a player draft that they did a night or two nights before the game, and there was a couple guys that weren't there. Ja'Kai Moore had family matters that he had to attend to and wasn't there in attendance because of that. And Clayton Henry, a promising right tackle for South Carolina, was out due to injury for, I believe, the majority of spring ball. But even with that bearing in mind, it still did not look great, because the Gamecocks gave up 10 sacks in the Garnet and Black spring game, and probably a lot more hurries and pressures that obviously weren't kept track of because it is a spring game, admittedly, at the end of the day. So, essentially for South Carolina, both offensive tackles from this past football season will not be back for 2023. And even if Jaylen Nichols comes back, you gotta wonder, is he going to be 100%? Is he even going to be able to start, really, if he's going to come back in the middle of the season? So you've got a few players left at both offensive tackle spots that lead to, admittedly, more questions than possibly answers. And those players are Ja'Kai Moore, Tyshawn Wanamaker, Marquis Anderson, and Clayton Henry. Now, when it comes to Ja'Kai Moore and Tyshawn Wanamaker, both of these guys are your most experienced players out of this particular group. So some might say that these two guys are the shoo-ins probably to be the starters at the offensive tackle positions this coming season. But the thing is, Ja'Kai Moore and Tyshawn Wanamaker have been extremely inconsistent throughout their career when it comes to pass protection at these respective spots. Tyshawn Wanamaker has an average pass blocking grade of 48.4 according to Pro Football Focus throughout 14 games in his career at that right tackle spot. Not exactly ideal based on Pro Football Focus's grade scale. Now for Ja'Kai Moore, last season, for example, he had a pass blocking grade of 45.1 in 17 pass blocking snaps against Kentucky. But against Texas A&M the very next week, a team that's arguably much deeper and more talented on the defensive line than Kentucky is, he had a grade of 69.5 in 30 pass blocking snaps. So obviously, that goes to show you right there in that small sample size, Ja'Kai Moore has been a little bit up and down when it comes to his overall performance in pass protection. You talk about Marquis Anderson. Marquis Anderson, this one's obvious. He has never played a collegiate snap in an official college football game. And I gotta say, I don't think playing him at left tackle would work well for him in year one. Marquis Anderson has got a lot of promise. I think he's got the most potential out of all the offensive linemen the Gamecocks are bringing in with this 2023 recruiting class. But the last thing you want to do with a young player who's got as much potential as Marquis Anderson is put him in a spot that long-term he likely is not going to play, and also have his confidence get broken. Marquis Anderson played valiantly in terms of his effort in the spring game, but Elijah Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., admittedly, more often than not, they got the better of him back on April the 15th. And nothing against Elijah Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., but there's no question that if Marquis Anderson were to play left tackle, he would probably face even more talented edge rushers than those two guys. It's the SEC. Almost every team in this conference has got a solid pass rusher on the edge. So, it might not be the best idea to put Marquis Anderson at that spot. Case Henry, he missed all of spring ball earlier this year, and he has primarily played right tackle. In the last 3 years, he has played football in general. So, if you put Case Henry, say, maybe at left tackle, obviously that would be a big transition for him in terms of essentially flipping all the terminology and communication that he's got to get down in Dowell Loggains' offense. You could also maybe say put him at right tackle, but again, we're talking about pass protection here. Case Henry was a pretty solid run blocker in high school, but pass protection, we just do not have a sample size there. Tyshawn Wanamaker, again, he's been very inconsistent. Admittedly, probably has left a little bit to be desired in that aspect, but he's at least got starting experience. So with there, it's a question of, do you go with the unknown factor here with Case Henry, or do you stick with the guy that has played in that spot before in Tyshawn Wanamaker? So you can see where I'm going with the offensive tackle spot and pass protection. There's a lot of questions here that this coaching staff is going to have to try to find the answers to within the next few months. Questions that could possibly change how a couple games play out for South Carolina in the 2023 football season. And here's the thing. Spencer Rattler and Antoine Juice Wells are two uber-talented players, two of the best players at their positions in the country for this next season. Nobody denies that. But if the offensive line cannot block in pass protection on the edge, it does not matter how good Spencer Rattler and Antoine Juice Wells are. They're going to struggle to be able to get the ball out. And here's the other thing. It could handicap Dowell Loggains in terms of his play calling. South Carolina wouldn't be able to call a lot of long, drawn-out play-action plays, a lot of shot plays that take a while to develop, because you need to have your quarterback have a clean pocket, enough of a clean pocket that is, so that he can go through his progressions and reads before finding his target and getting rid of the football. And you can't ask the tight ends to sit back and help you in pass protection all the time. Trey Knox and Joshua Simon are two receiving tight ends for the most part. They can help you there, but you're not going to best utilize their skill set if you're always having them stay back to help your offensive line, because they cannot help themselves in one-on-one situations. So, bottom line, Pass protection offensive tackle is my biggest question mark for this football team heading out of spring practice. Now, coming up in just a couple moments, I'm going to talk about a couple of other questions for South Carolina. One of them regarding one of the offensive skill positions for this team and who could be the guy at that particular spot. And also, I'm going to discuss a facet of the defensive side of the ball that's been a problem for Shane Beamer and this coaching staff, admittedly, since day one, and something that they're going to try to rectify in the fall. We're going to dive into all that in just a couple moments, but first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Later tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the Phoenix Suns will be taking on the Denver Nuggets in Colorado. The Phoenix Suns are currently 5.5-point underdogs according to FanDuel, and the money line for the Phoenix Suns is set at plus 180. Obviously, the Suns have given the Nuggets quite the fight so far, as they've now evened the series at 2 games apiece, and KD and Devin Booker, they might be the best duo right now in the NBA playoffs. So if you think that the Phoenix Suns will make this game extremely close, or maybe even win the game outright, then put some money down on the Phoenix Suns later tonight, whether it's the spread or the money line. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And speaking of every single day, thank you to all of you everydayers for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first watch or listen. If you want to become an everydayer of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, be sure to give us a follow wherever you get your audio podcast daily, or subscribe and click the bell on YouTube so you don't miss out on future alerts and notifications on future shows from Locked On Gamecocks. All right, let's get back into the 2 remaining questions that I have for South Carolina's football team coming out of spring practice. And the first one revolves around the running back position, and specifically, which running back currently on the roster will get the most carries. Now, obviously, the answer to this question could change depending on what all happens in the transfer portal. The Gamecocks hosted Notre Dame transfer back Logan Diggs for a visit this past weekend. If you're interested in more information regarding what that recruitment looks like right now, then be sure to check out my show that I had come out yesterday morning. But regarding the guys currently on the roster, they all have specific play styles. Juju McDowell is what I like to call the June bug of the running back room because he's a guy that's got a really solid combination of both agility and acceleration to make up for the lack of size that he has for the position. Mario Anderson Jr., the Newberry transfer, is a one-cut north-south power back. He would possibly be the best answer to this concern, except he has no experience at the Division I level at all. And while he apparently seemed to make a good transition in spring practice, practice is obviously different from playing live games against other football teams in which you don't know exactly what they're going to run. Dakereon Joyner, he obviously got moved to the running back position during spring practice, one of the biggest storylines throughout that month-and-a-half stretch, and he showed that he has natural ability at the position, and he is a bigger body who could handle other duties like pass protection, and because of his ball skills, being a guy that's played quarterback and wide receiver in the past, he also can catch the ball at an efficient rate. But the thing with Dakereon Joyner, again, is pretty obvious here. He hasn't played the position since his early days back in high school ball. Dontavious Braswell is the last running back that has sort of yet to actually joined the team officially, but I went ahead and included him in this group because he will be arriving, I believe, early on in June. Dontavious Braswell has got the speed and the overall size and ball carrier vision to make an impact at the running back position year one. And admittedly, if there's any position on a football team where a true freshman can make a pretty big impact, one of those positions is probably the running back position. But again, you cannot bank on that with Dontavious Braswell. You can't just bank on a true freshman to come in and play a position as strenuous as the running back spot and be really good right away. So, again, this concern, I guess it sort of all depends on what your overall opinion is of this running back room. If you're looking for the best all-around skill set, right now, honestly, you might have to say Dakereon Joyner should be that lead back. If you're looking for the guy that's most experienced, then clearly Juju McDowell, in terms of his SEC experience, would probably hold the knot there. If you're looking for a guy who could possibly make up for potential offensive line struggles in the running game this year, then Mario Anderson Jr. might be your guy because of the way that he runs downhill and behind his shoulder pads. So again, it probably all depends on what your overall thoughts are with this room, but nonetheless right now, there's no clear answer regarding who's going to be that lead back out of this current running back position group. And so, for that reason, it is my second biggest concern with the team still coming out of spring ball. My last concern heading into the summer and getting closer to fall camp for South Carolina revolves around South Carolina's rush defense and whether or not this will be the year that the rush defense improves. The Gamecocks in 2021 and 2022 held both the third worst and second worst marks in terms of average yards allowed per carry in the SEC conference. And based on the talk this offseason, those statistics have not been sitting well with Shane Beamer and defensive coordinator Clayton White and the rest of the defensive coaching staff. There's been a lot of discussion from all these coaches saying that rush defense has got to get better across the board. They recognize it, they understand that, and it's something that is being emphasized with the players throughout this offseason. And the thing is, if South Carolina is going to do it, they're going to have to rely on a lot of new guys in their defensive front specifically, as the Gamecocks are replacing 5 of their 6 main starters from the defensive front this past season. I'm including guys like Gilbert Edmond and Jordan Birch, who obviously left in the transfer portal. The only returner, really, from the defensive front last year that played a lot of snaps is Tonka Hemingway. And again, he also missed spring ball. Granted, it's probably not that big of a deal that he was not there in practice compared to some of these other guys. Now, watching the spring game from the defense's perspective, while I think that South Carolina's defense did good in terms of rush defense, I don't think that the spring game can be used as a sort of conclusionary type event, if that's even a word, to where we can confidently say this rush defense is going to be better in 2023. Because I mentioned it earlier, South Carolina's offensive line, and I know the roster was all mixed up, it did not look good in terms of run blocking on the offensive front. And obviously that helped out South Carolina's defensive front a great deal, especially linebackers Stone Blanton and Debo Williams, who seem to get a lot of the primary snaps as sort of those first string linebackers in Clayton White's defense. And I do think that those two guys can make this rush defense a lot better. I think that Stone Blanton is a really good athlete who was a hard worker both on the football field and also when it comes to film study. He has been touted as one of the hardest workers on the team by head football coach Shane Beamer. And you look at a guy like Debo Williams, he's a guy that has sort of bid his time over the past couple years. He was a special teamer in 2021. Last year, he saw an expanded role in the defense, and he's a guy that obviously is probably more known for his abilities in rush defense. He's a guy that once he thinks that he's ready to just go downhill, he is shot out of a cannon. He'll lay the wood on people, and he's a very good tackler when he can get his hands on you. So I do think those two guys are going to make the linebacker play in rush defense automatically better, admittedly. Up front, I'm a little bit more worried. more so about setting the edge, because again, you just haven't seen it with a couple of these guys yet at the SEC level. Guys like Terrell Dawkins, and obviously a Brian Thomas Jr. How's Jordan Stroud going to look coming off of a torn ACL? I don't think you have to worry about the interior defensive line, really. I think that group's quite deep, and obviously, I love the hire of Travian Robertson, but all in all, South Carolina's rush defense, again, I just don't think that the spring game offered a clear enough picture of what that's going to be like this upcoming fall. So, for the Gamecocks, those are my three biggest concerns heading into the summer and getting closer to fall camp. Pass protection on the edges of the offensive line, who's going to be the lead back right now out of this current running back room, and how's the rush defense going to look this upcoming fall? Three big-time questions that they'll have to answer if the Gamecocks are going to improve and continue to progress linearly once again in 2023. All right, now getting into the final bit of today's show, let's switch gears and talk about a little bit of recruiting on the football side, and more specifically, a 2025 quarterback prospect. And I know some of y'all might be sitting there and thinking, well, Andrew, it's going to be a while until we actually know whether or not this guy's going to come to South Carolina. So who is it that we really need to know about? Well, I'm going to tell y'all right now, you need to know the name Deuce Knight, a Mississippi native from the 2025 class, and a guy that I think could be a special prospect. Deuce Knight is a guy that visited South Carolina for the spring game back on April 15th, and he and I had a quick conversation about his visit after that weekend, and Deuce Knight gave a lot of props to the program, saying that there was a lot of facets that he really liked, and he was extremely impressed by the fan atmosphere, considering the fact that it was a spring game in April. And so Deuce Knight seems to be a guy that has a lot of interest in South Carolina, and admittedly, he doesn't have an offer yet from the Gamecocks, but from what he told me in that conversation back in mid-April, that's not going to stay that way forever. And once the Gamecocks do offer, he says they will be a major contender for him in his recruitment. And that timeline for his offer might have been accelerated by what he just did in the Elite 11 Mississippi Regional with his testing numbers. The Elite 11, for those that don't know, is the premier camp series for high school football quarterbacks. It is basically known as the camp that if you're one of the best quarterbacks in the country, you're going to be showing up at the regionals and eventually the Elite 11 finals, which has trotted out many future star quarterbacks both at the college and NFL level. So Deuce Knight went to the Mississippi Regional for the Elite 11 this past weekend, obviously not being too far away from his hometown of Bluesdale, Mississippi. And in terms of his overall testing numbers, he absolutely killed it. His 40-yard dash time was 4.53 seconds. A reminder, this kid is a sophomore right now. His vertical jump was 41.9 inches. His 20-yard shuttle was 4.39 seconds. His final overall rating for that camp was 122.28, which was 18.99 points higher than the second place finisher for the Mississippi Regional and 31.78 points better than the next best quarterback from the 2025 class that was there. Oh, and by the way, he was competing against a bunch of 2024 quarterbacks as well at this regional in Oxford. Deuce Knight has the potential to be special. And if you still are wondering why you need to remember his name, well, get ready for this. His 122.28 rating, when stacked up against quarterbacks that have previously performed at the Elite 11 Camp Series, was 0.33 points lower than Anthony Richardson, who was just selected 4th overall by the Indianapolis Colts in the 2023 NFL Draft. 2.25 points higher than Justin Fields, who was a first-round pick, I believe, in the 2022 NFL Draft by the Chicago Bears, and 20.55 points higher than 2024 Heisman Trophy winner Marcus Mariota, who is also still currently in the NFL. So, you take all of this into account, Deuce Knight has the chance to be a special quarterback prospect for his class. Now, I understand that this testing overall does not give really any insight into maybe the kind of quarterback he is from a passing standpoint, but I'm just going to assume right now, based on what the evaluators are saying and based on what his final rating was from this camp, that he did quite well in that aspect as well. I think he absolutely deserves the benefit of the doubt in that regard. So, I know again that it would be a long ways away before Deuce Knight's going to sign the dotted line with his national letter of intent. But Gamecock fans, I'm telling you right now, for the 2025 recruiting class, remember the name Deuce Knight. He could very well be South Carolina's primary quarterback target for the 2025 recruiting class. South Carolina has done quite well recently at recruiting the skill positions. They're starting to catch up a little bit at the wide receiver and tight end positions. And Deuce Knight, I promise you, based on the one conversation I've had with him so far, he has taken notice of South Carolina. And so, if the Gamecocks continue to progress and they prioritize him, they could very well be in the running for him all the way to the very end. And if they can land him, potentially have a special quarterback on their roster. With that being said, y'all, that's going to do it for today's show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show, as always. What are your big concerns about South Carolina's football team coming out of spring practice? Do you agree with the ones that I brought up, or do you think that there's other concerns that I should have talked about on today's show? Let me know your thoughts on that and 2025 quarterback Deuce Knight down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube. Or if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app, you can shoot me a direct message both on Twitter and on Facebook. On Twitter, you can find me at @alion_SC. And on Facebook, you can find the Locked On Gamecocks podcast actual page there. And once again, thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first watch or listen here today. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I will catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.